And we're back. Good evening, darlings and hamburgers, both. Lovely to see you all. I'm Tad. Um, Not that I think there's anybody at this point showing up who doesn't know that already, since it seems to be a fairly compact group of repeat customers. You poor buggers. I wish you could find something actually useful and instructive to do on Sunday nights. But I'll take it. I definitely will take it. Anyway, hello. Good to see you all, and good to be here with you. It is Sunday. It is now 1 minute after 7, and I'm going to be reading from the Dragons of Ordinary Farm in just a few minutes. Not a whole lot to talk about this week in terms of anything concrete as to what I've been doing. Just working on the books. As I mentioned last night, it's a bit complicated right now because instead of working on one book where I can go all the way through it, and then if something's not working out at the end, I can go back and change something earlier in the book, because there's so many plot lines and things, and they're all slightly time shifted. Anyway, instead of being able to do that, I'm now publishing the first half of the book before the second half of the book. So it's very hard not only to work on the second half, but I have to make final decisions on the first half of the book before I get to the second half of the book, which is confusing. But confusion is not an unfamiliar state for me. In fact, it's probably my home state. So I'm not complaining. I'm just mentioning it. What else in the way of news? Just the usual. We got to hang out with some friends last night. Our friends Mike and Paula, who we dearly love. Mike is writer Michael Marshall Smith, and Paula Granger, his wife. And so we did that, and which is why I moved last night's reading back an hour again, but just for that one weekend. And what else going on? Dogs are just dogging around. Cat's over there sleeping because she's already been fed. Some of the children, the young people, I shouldn't call them children anymore because they're all legally adults. I think I just keep calling them children because it's the one thing that prevents me from beating them mercilessly all the time. As soon as I think of them as being legally capable of answering for their own actions, then of course my urge is to pummel them repeatedly. Anyway, the young people are out. Some of the young people are out. Some of the young people are in. And so mostly down here in the office, it's just me, you, and a sleeping cat. So that's what we're doing tonight. Any other news about anything? No, we've been working on cover ideas and stuff like that. The good news, bad news is that for various complicated reasons, Michael Whalen's not going to be doing the last two covers. And instead of doing what they did with Shadow March, when we changed cover art partway through, they're not going to go for something that looks kind of like what Michael had been doing. Last time we had Todd Lockwood kind of going forward with the same approach after the first book. This time we are going to be going to a look much more like the Brothers of the Wind look, which for those of you who haven't seen it is much more of what I would call an icon. It's, a picture on a single color background. In the case of Brothers of the Wind, it's a picture of of the dragon who is so important to that story. There will be no dragons on the last two books of what the Navigator's Children has been divided into the Narrow Dark and the Navigator's Children. They are icons. They will be icons. It will be a similar look to that. But what exactly that look will be, what exactly will be on those covers, I can't tell you yet. I will show you when I have some of the artwork, when we're a little closer to finished artwork, because we're still very much in the conceptual stage at the moment. Let me think. Anything else going on? Just as I mentioned last night, I myself am wearying myself because I keep coming up with new ideas for books and stories, but also primarily the ones that are frustrating are the novels, because novels always take a while to write, and as usual I have several novels stacked up that who knows, I may never find time to write any of them. And I'm a full-time writer, but I just seem to come up with ideas for books faster than I can actually write books, which to me is not surprising, especially the length of books I tend to write. So that's mostly what's going on with me. Deborah is working on her various fabric businesses, doing a lot of knitting and sewing and stuff like that. Plus, of course, all the family business, which is, we are just the two of us. We are our company. And that requires a great deal of work. So Deb's doing that. And some of the kids are in school, and, we're just hanging in there waiting to be able to go out a little more often, and not have to worry about, infecting anybody or getting infected. We are all vaccinated, as I'm sure you know. At least those of you who've been following. And, of course we are. We'll just leave it at that. We're big believers in science in this household. Go figure. Anyway, so that's basically the what's happening and whatnot around here. There's not a lot of new and exciting news. None of the animals or young people have exploded or anything. We have not hit an iceberg. In fact, there aren't any icebergs where we live, so we would have trouble hitting one anyway. And of course, we have no boat, so we'd have to do it with our house, which would be a lot of trouble. So that's actually a good thing. I can report that as a piece of good news. We have not struck an iceberg. Okay, anything else? No, can't think of anything. If I do, I'll just stop and tell you later on, as I always do anyway, because I have very little self-control. Let me check in and see who is here saying hello in what some people refer to as the as the romper room portion of the show. After I first mentioned that, and others have picked up on it. Anyway, Medardo, hello, good to see you, senor. What a pleasure. Un placer. Exhausted, but with more faith in humankind. All right, I'm very glad to hear it. It's tough sometimes, especially these days, because people are so polarized in terms of they can't simply have different beliefs now. They also have to believe that the people who don't agree with them are criminals or thieves or morons or communists or fascists or whatever. But yeah, basically it's up to sensible people. This is my only political rant of the show here, because I try to stay out of the specifics of politics. Anybody who, knows me and follows my work and my social presence knows what my politics are like, or has a pretty good idea. But the only thing I am going to say is it's absolutely crucial that the people of good sense and good heart in the center of society, the people who vote, the people who try to do good things for each other, that try to make rational decisions based on rational information, all of that kind of stuff. Just what we used to think of as ordinary citizens. That the ordinary citizens stick together and don't let people pull us into any more than they already have, into completely polarized factions. Because that only benefits the crazy people. That's just a fact. The more polarized that a society gets, the more that the crazy people begin to assume positions of power, as we are already seeing, especially on the right in this country. So anyway, end of rant. But, find like-minded folks, stick together, try to come up with solutions based on sense and, facts and reality. And we will all move forward. Okay. So anyway, I said hello to Medardo. Jerry! Mr. Unangst, sup with you. Ray, hello, Ray. Hi to you. And Ray says hi, Tad and all. Kelly, yeah, Sunday. That's, I'm sure you guys had it wherever in the country you were, but here in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, when I was growing up, we had Fremont Raceway, which would always run these ads going, Sunday, Fremont Raceway. Big Daddy Don Garlits against Don the Snake Prudhomme. And they were like, hot rod, drag racing, and things like that. So Sunday, they always go together in my mind. And I'm sure for many other people of my approximate age, at least the ones who are still alive. Anyway, so Sunday, yes, Sunday storytelling time. Hi, Kelly, good to see you. Jared, hello, good to see you. Yes, I've had just a fine Sunday today. There was an unfortunate 49ers game, but my San Francisco Giants clinched the Western Division, which is a huge load off of my sports-loving mind. I won't bore people with the details, because you either like sports, in which case you understand, or you don't like sports, in which case, why should I bore you talking about sports? I won't. Anyway, so yes, that has saved my entire Sunday. That and being able to spend time with you nice people. Cliff, hello, evening, Cliff. Yeah, best wishes to you and yours also. Claudia, hello, how are you? Good evening. Becca, happy, joy. Now that's almost as reminiscent as Sunday. Penny, hello, good to have you with us. I'm glad that this worked out to be a good time for you. Tim, greetings to you too. Had a good week? Yeah, had a pretty good week, all things considered, so no complaints here. And Barban, hello, Barb, good to see you. And Kristen, hello, Kristen, nice to see you too. Yes, this is the 7, you're asking me? It's the 7 p.m. one, right? Yep, this is indeed. Kenneth, hi, Kenneth, how are you? Mark, hello, Mark, my friend, good to hear from you. And James D. Scott. James has 2 names and an initial, which so far I think makes him king of the viewership today. G'day. No, never panic. But yes, picnic. So picnicking, yes, you chose the right thing. That's all you have to say is just you were picnicking, not panicking. So excellent. Nancy, hi Nancy, how are you? And who else is here that I haven't said hello to? James, hello James, good to see you, buddy. And that's the other James. We have James D. Scott and James Werfs. So that second one, James Werfs was the one I was just saying hello to. Who else have we got here? Jeremy, hello Jeremy, good to see you, bud. And Steve, a pleasure. And Greg, you're late. That's all right. I've just been bibbling. So you haven't missed anything except Tad Babble, which, as I've often said before, thank you all for being here. So I have someone to babble out besides my family and my dogs. My dogs can ignore it. My family, it's a little more difficult. So I think it's nice every now and then to have some fresh ears to babble into. And I think my family thanks you for that. So anyway, so without much further ado, we are going to go ahead with The Dragons of Ordinary Farm, written by myself and my beautiful and talented wife, Deborah Beale. And I am going to start with Chapter 7. And I showed the picture to people last night as a foretaste, but now I'm going to let the thing focus on it now. Chapter 7 is called A Cloud of Horns, and there's a very nice illustration of Lucinda and a strange, deformed-looking animal of some kind, which looks like, a cross between a narwhal and a circus pony. I wonder what that could be. Let's find out. So, Chapter 7, and for those of you, obviously, who weren't here last night, basically, Tyler and Lucinda met some more people of the farm, including Haneb, the extremely scarred young man who tends the dragons, and Sarah the cook, and other people who work on the farm. And then they met Meseret the dragon, who is the size of a school bus and is in fact a Relio Trulio actual dragon. Anyway, so now we are going to read Chapter 7, A Cloud of Horns. Let me first move this. I've learned that if I don't want to be aching afterward with my weird inflammatory and joint issues, it helps me if I can set my book down on something instead of having to hold it up with one arm the whole time. Anyway, I've only said this like 9 times, but I'm going to say it again. Chapter 7, A Cloud of Horns. Mr. Walkwell sat waiting for them in front of the house. He had hitched 2 horses to the ancient wagon this time, the brown mare that had brought them back from the train station, and a spotted gray, perhaps to help with the extra weight of a rusty old 2-wheeled trailer piled with feed sacks that had been attached to the back of the wagon. The whole thing had the look of a small and not very exciting parade. Haneb, the slender man with the scarred face, sat in the wagon, staring down at his feet. 3 other farmhands, sat with him among the feed sacks. Let me start that sentence again. 3 other farmhands sat with him among the feed sacks, short, squat, tan-skinned men who looked as if they might be Asian. They touched the brims of their odd hats and smiled shyly at the children. "It's the 3 amigos," Tyler said quietly to Lucinda, but she either didn't remember the movie or didn't think it was funny enough to laugh. Mr. Walkwell didn't say a word as the children and Ragnar climbed on. When they were settled atop the feed sacks, he clicked his tongue and the horses started around the driveway, wagon wheels scrunching through the hard-packed gravel. He was no more talkative when Tyler asked questions about the previous night, the dragon, or the day's itinerary. Seamoth could beat standing stones in a staring contest, said Ragnar, smiling. You're wasting your time, boy. They drove for almost a quarter of an hour across the farm to their first stop, which surprised Tyler. He would have guessed all the animals would be close to the house. When they had reached the base of the hills, and the house was almost out of sight behind them, they came to a halt at a chained gate. On the gate's far side, a trail led away down the straw-colored hill. Mr. Walkwell unlocked the gate. You two children stay with us, he said suddenly and sharply. If you disobey or anger me, you will go back to the cart to wait. The three amigos, whom Ragnar had introduced as Kiwa, Jeg, and Hoka, got down and began to pile feed sacks on their shoulders until each was carrying 3. Mr. Walkwell took 4. Tyler felt secretly certain by the ease with which he lifted that he could have carried more, and massive Ragnar took 3 on each shoulder. Without being asked, Tyler helped Haneb lift a sack onto his shoulders. The scarred man did not meet his eye, but mumbled a thank you in accented, liquid-sounding English. More dragons? Tyler asked Lucinda quietly as they fell in line behind the amigos. Do you think this is where they live? Lucinda pulled up, horrified. You're joking, right? I'm not going near a bunch of wild dragons. Mr. Walkwell growled as he almost ran into them from behind. Keep walking, you children. If you trip me and I drop these sacks on you, you will not thank me. But Lucinda was not moving. Are we going to see a bunch of wild dragons? Herd or whatever? Because I don't want to do that. The wiry old man made a snorting noise. Do you think the world is so full of these most ancient ones that they roam about in flocks, like pigeons? He shook his head. No. Dragons are special and rare. We have 2 dragons here on the farm. You saw one in the sick barn, Meseret, the female. Her mate is named Alamu. We will not see him today. He made a strange noise in his throat. If we are lucky. I don't understand, Lucinda said. No, you do not, Mr. Walkwell agreed. Walk faster, please. Tyler said, You let the male dragon, roam wild? Is that safe? He would kill himself trying to get out of the cage or barn, but if he is well fed, Alamu is perfectly content to stay near Meseret, hiding in the high rocky places. Naturally, we keep him very well fed. When they reached the bottom of the hill, they found themselves in a woodland of madrone and oak trees, so that instead of the hot sun, they walked through ragged patches of shade. The farmhands stopped and began dropping the sacks in a little clearing where a long dry pond had become a shallow bowl of green weeds and yellow grass. Metal troughs stood at the base of several of the trees. The men began cutting open the bags and pouring dark green pellets that looked like giant rabbit food into the troughs. Tyler stepped forward to have a closer look. A long brown hand descended on Tyler's shoulder, stopping him as if he'd run into a wall. Stay here, boy, Mr. Walkwell said. They are easily startled. Ragnar, standing at the center of the clearing, lifted his fingers to his mouth and whistled 3 loud, shrill notes. They all waited. Haneb and the other farmhands standing close to Ragnar, as if a rainstorm was coming, and the blond man was a tall, sheltering tree. What are we waiting for? Tyler said at last. And why isn't it coming? Not one but many, Mr. Walkwell said. And they are coming, child. Likely they were far away. Listen! For a few moments, Tyler had no idea what he meant. He could hear nothing but the rumble of a distant storm. Then he realized it was June in the California Valley, and there wasn't a cloud anywhere in the sky. The drumming noise grew louder until the ground itself began to quiver. Tyler had a sudden feeling that the entire grove of trees was being lifted up by gigantic engines and was just about to take off into the sky like a rocket ship. Then the unicorns came. They flooded into the clearing like a storm, with so much power and such a swirl of reddish dust, muscled flanks all white and gray and dappled, that they seemed like clouds hurrying along the ground, struggling to fly as far as possible before they burst and released their burdens of rain. But there was no mistaking the bright, sharp horns, or the flashing of their eyes, or the glint of their pearly hooves, when some young ones excitedly reared in the air at the center of the clearing, jabbing and jabbing. "Oh!" said Lucinda beside him. And for the second time in 2 days, Tyler realized that his sister was holding his hand. Strange as that was, he didn't pull away. As he watched the tall creatures thundering back and forth across the clearing, snorting and bucking, ivory horns shimmering like flickers of lightning, he felt he was watching some kind of magic river, that if he lost contact with the ground, it might just carry him away and he would never be heard of again. "Oh," his sister said again. There really wasn't much more to say. The unicorns crowded into the clearing, bumping and rearing so that it was hard even to guess how many there were. 2 dozen? 3? They seemed at least as big as ordinary horses. Tyler didn't have a lot of experience with real horses, but more slender and long-legged, with great tangled banners of mane at their necks and tufts on their chests and ankles. But it was the horns that made something amazing into something truly unbelievable. The pointed spirals that grew not from the tops of their heads, as in the sappy posters Lucinda still had in her room, but farther down, just below the line of the eyes, like the horn of a rhinoceros. The herd formed into groups around the troughs and fed, horns clacking together gently, almost silently, ranged according to some hierarchy that Tyler couldn't make out, since it didn't seem to have much to do with age or size or color or anything else. At some troughs, the young unicorns fed first, while at others the small ones stood patiently, while an adult with a mane like store window Christmas snow took the lead. "They're so beautiful," Lucinda kept saying over and over. "Where do they come from?" Tyler asked Ragnar, who seemed more likely to answer questions than Mr. Walkwell. "What are they eating? Do you have to feed them every day?" "They come from China," Ragnar answered him. "Or they did once. Now they are gone. Kilin, they call them. And they eat grass and other things, but we give them every day, what is the word? Simos? Vitamin supplement," growled Mr. Walkwell, who was squatting beside a gray adult unicorn. It watched him nervously from the corner of its eye while it ate, and he in turn examined it for any signs of ill health. "Yes, vitamins," said Ragnar, "because the grass alone is not enough to keep them healthy, I think. And there are other medicines in the food, too. These are the only unicorns still living in the world, so we must take good care of them." "Yeah," said Tyler. "Awesome." He was certainly interested in the unicorns, but more interested in going back to see the dragon again. Lucinda, who didn't seem to have listened to anything said, was walking slowly toward the nearest trough, her eyes wide as though she was hypnotized. Tyler hoped she wouldn't do anything embarrassing, like start crying with joy or some other girl and unicorn thing. She stopped, only yards away from one of the young unicorns, which examined her with large gray eyes. It didn't look frightened, but Tyler thought it didn't look happy either. When Lucinda did not move any closer, it put its head down again and nosed in the trough. Mr. Walkwell and Ragnar were together off to the side, looking over other members of the herd. The young unicorn's pearly horn moved back and forth in front of Lucinda as it fed. Tyler watched his sister, who was staring at the creature as if she had just opened her front door to find her #1 boy band heartthrob, waiting there to take her on a surprise date. She slowly reached out her hand to touch the horn. Tyler watched, wondering if he should say something. The unicorns were wild animals, so they were dangerous, weren't they? Or were they? It was hard to know in such a crazy place. A lot of things suddenly happened, all at the same time. Haneb saw what Lucinda was doing and ran toward her, crying, "No! No!" The unicorn reared up and made a startled noise, something blaring and utterly strange. As it came down, it shook its head violently from side to side. The horn whipped past Lucinda's face so fast she didn't even flinch until after it was gone. Haneb reached her and pulled her away, but now all the unicorns were milling and snorting, prancing nervously, making little tornadoes of dust spin up. Mr. Walkwell whistled a single shrill burst, and they began to calm, but still would not come close to the troughs again. "You scared me!" Lucinda shouted at the scarred man, yanking herself free of his protective grasp. She burst into tears, then turned and retreated toward the wagon. "Wow, are you nuts?" Tyler said to her as she hurried past. He was stunned and impressed that his boring sister would do something so Tyler-like. "They said not to touch anything. That thing almost stabbed you." Haneb, who looked as though what had happened was somehow his fault, shuffled off to gather up feed bags. "Everyone back to the truck," Ragnar said. He bent to pick something off the ground, then went to talk to Lucinda at the edge of the clearing, where she stood wiping her tears away. You could not know," he told her kindly, "but the Killian do not like their horns to be touched. Very sensitive." I didn't mean," Lucinda swallowed. "It was just so beautiful." "Yes, they are," said Ragnar gently. "But it is no ordinary thing like a bull's horn or a deer's antler. It is a sort of tooth that grows up through the skull like the tusk of the white corpse whales. Two teeth, actually, growing together. The Enhjorning, as my people call it, used it to test the air, the water, to smell almost as a cat uses its whiskers or a snake its tongue." "A tooth?" said Tyler. "That's weird." "Shut up," Lucinda said, and gave him a dig with her elbow. Her eyes were red and puffy. "Just don't say anything." She abruptly veered away from the two of them and walked over to Haneb, who was watching with a worried expression. But whatever she said seemed to put him at ease. He nodded his head vigorously as they walked and talked, still keeping his face turned away from her as much as possible. "I am glad that she thanks Haneb," said Ragnar. "The little man may have saved her life." "Saved her life?" Tyler made a face. "You're joking, right?" Ragnar held out his large hand. Lying across the palm was a hank of Lucinda's golden brown hair, cut as neatly as if by a pair of scissors. "The horn did this. It came that close. It is not wise to startle a unicorn. They are lovely to see, but they are not pets, and they are not even friends." A cold tingle went right up Tyler's backbone. He wasn't always crazy about his sister, but he didn't want her shredded by some razor-horned horse either. "Are we done?" he asked as they climbed back onto the wagon and waited for Mr. Walkwell, who was still crunching toward them. "Where do we go next?" Ragnar gave him a serious look. "It depends on whether you too learn to do as you are told. Because now we are going to show you some of the dangerous animals." All right. Chapter 8. Whoops. Let me turn that there. Chapter 8. Come on, focus, focus, focus. And it is titled Reptiles, More or Less. But I still don't get it. Where did the unicorns come from? Lucinda asked as the wagon bumped along. And the dragon. Ragnar smiled and shook his head. I have said many times that is not for me to answer. But look there, and you will see something. Lucinda didn't want to look at anything else. She wanted to keep the amazing sight of the unicorns in her memory and not let anything else push it out. That cloud of manes and tails and flashing eyes and horns. And horns, yes. Poor Hanem. The farmhand had only been trying to protect her. She still felt bad about how she had reacted. What is it? Tyler asked. It's huge. Lucinda looked up, suddenly fearful that they were being taken to something even more terrifying than the dragon. A chained ogre out of a story, or some monstrous girl-grabbing gorilla. Instead, she saw only a pale, whitewashed building stretched along the valley floor below them. But what a building it was! Sunk half into the hillside, a single low wooden structure like a dozen oversized shoeboxes placed end to end, its roof covered in solar panels. It seemed as long as the immense playing field at her school. It's a giant barn, she said. Ragnar nodded. It is, child. That is the dragon barn. No dragons in it now, since Meseret is in the sick barn. But you will see what else is there. Was it built just for the dragon? Tyler asked as the wagon crunched to a stop. No, this was made for an earlier owner of the land who kept cattle. We tore out many of the stalls to make space for Meseret. You will see. There are train tracks going right into it, Lucinda said as they walked through the low dry grass toward the high doors. Of a sort, Ragnar said. They are for a rolling flat car to bring feed and to move Meseret when it must be done. Why would you even do that? Tyler asked. That dragon must weigh as much as a whale. A small one, yes, but these creatures are delicate, and what makes one animal sick can sweep through them all. So we move the sick ones to the special barn. But you are right, it is not easy to move Meseret, even with the lifting thing. Lucinda was too startled by the smell and the heat that hit her as they went through the big doors to wonder what a lifting thing might be. The ceiling of this barn was dauntingly high, twice as high as the sick barns, spider-webbed with metal girders and dozens of bright hanging lights. The odor of the place made her nose prickle and her eyes water. It smelled like the dragon, but more so. More musky, more sour, more strange. Stranger than a dragon? She couldn't help thinking. A day ago, she couldn't even have imagined meeting a dragon at all. She heard a sound behind her and turned to see Colin Needle coming in after them. Hello, Lucinda, he said. Looks like I caught up with you. Are you not supposed to be working on the feed budget, Master Needle? Asked Ragnar sternly. For a moment, as the pale boy stared angrily at the big yellow-haired man, Colin didn't look very nice at all. As it happens, my mother sent me here to ask Gideon something. Ragnar was still frowning. Mr. Goldring is here. I thought he was ill this morning and was going to stay in bed. Colin shrugged. He changed his mind. My mother wasn't very happy about it, but you know how Gideon is. Just then something screeched, a noise like failing car brakes. Lucinda jumped. What was that? She demanded. You said the dragon was gone. Don't be such a baby, Tyler growled. She wanted to slug him. Like he wasn't ever scared of anything. How about when Mom tried to get him to eat sushi? Ragnar patted her shoulder. I said no dragon, but the other serpents, this is their home too.
And not just reptiles, Colin said helpfully. Almost all of our cold-blooded animals live here. There are amphibians and some, well, not fish exactly. Their water must boil, she said. It's so hot in here. We turn up the heating lights while Meseret is gone, Ragnar explained. Why? Asked Tyler. Colin was happy to show what he knew. Most of the time, she contributes a lot of the warming of this place all by herself. Tyler scowled. What? She breathes fire on everything? No, Tyler, Colin said, Tyler like he was an elementary school teacher. Just with body heat. She's extremely large and she's warm-blooded. They crossed the open area inside the doors and trooped up the stairs behind Ragnar, who didn't look quite so big in this building. The second floor ran like a giant balcony, all the way around the interior of the massive barn, leaving the middle open. From up there, Lucinda could see the huge, empty expanse of straw-covered concrete where the dragon usually lay. Gideon is probably in the cockatrice pen, said Colin. Well, perhaps then we show those to you if Gideon is there, Ragnar told Lucinda and Tyler. But everyone must wear the eye shields. Goggles, Colin translated. A large wire enclosure took up much of this side of the second floor, and someone was moving around inside it. The figure straightened up when it saw them and gave a jerky wave with a garden-gloved hand. Lucinda could tell it was Gideon only by his skinny shape and his bathrobe, since his head was covered by something like a beekeeper's hood, which made him look like a very badly dressed space alien. It came to her suddenly that she didn't know what frightened her more, the animals or this stranger, this supposed relative, who out of the blue seemed to have claimed their lives. Scattered on the table, near the beginning of the wire mesh, lay thick plastic goggles, each with its own elastic strap, and the kind of paper masks people wore in hospitals. Brief interjection. You can tell this was written a few years ago, and you had to actually explain what kind of paper masks that what people wore paper masks for. Each with its own elastic strap, and the kind of paper masks people wore in hospitals. Ragnar passed Lucinda and Tyler one of each, but Lucinda only stared at hers with dismay. Do these cocky whatsits have diseases? I don't want to catch some snake disease. She heard Tyler snort, but ignored it. Someone had to be practical. Not for disease. Ragnar pulled on the goggles and tugged the mask into place. The elastic barely stretched around his big head and bushy beard. For spit. What? You'll see, said Colin. Don't worry, Lucinda. We're not going inside the pen. They're too nasty. And they bite also. But it's the spitting you really want to avoid. Gross, she said. Excellent, said Tyler. Uncle Gideon came out of the pen, being careful to latch the door behind him. Lucinda could see movement inside, but the enclosure was full of boxes and boards, piled haphazardly, and it was hard to make out what was actually in there. Gideon pulled off his hood and gave them an uncertain look. Lucinda, though she quaked inside, determinedly met his gaze. Gideon said, What did you think of the unicorns? It was amazing, Lucinda said. They're beautiful. A broad grin spread across Gideon's face. Aren't they? He said. Aren't they? Where they come from? Asked Tyler. Yes, when I see them running, I believe that what we're doing here is worth every dollar and every drop of sweat. Gideon mopped his brow with his sleeve. He was wearing ordinary pants under his bathrobe, but he had bedroom slippers on his feet instead of regular shoes. And in here we have the cockatrices and the basilisks. Don't take those goggles off until we tell you it's all right. Where are they? She asked. Ragnar said they spit. Yes, but it's perfectly all right. He frowned. Haven't you ever heard of these creatures before? Devil me, what happened to teaching children the classics? Basilisks go clear back to Pliny the Elder in ancient Rome, although old Pliny could have learned a thing or two from taking a tour of our little zoo. He wiped his forehead again. For one thing, he'd find out that the cockatrice and the basilisk are actually the same creature. I don't know what either of those are, said Lucinda, trying to peer more closely through the wire without actually touching it. She was very nervous something might jump out at her. Considering the brightness of the lights overhead, the pen was quite dark, and it was hard to make out anything. Cockastripe? Cockatrice, said Gideon. A medieval monster, or at least it was in the 11th and 12th centuries when it started to show up in bestiaries. Head of a rooster, tail of a serpent. And basilisks were supposed to be dragons that could kill with their eyes just by looking at someone. Lucinda took a step back. But that's not true, is it? Gideon laughed. He seemed stronger than he had the night before. Maybe Mrs. Needle's medicine was helping him. There's a grain of truth in most mythology, children. Ah, look there. He pointed to the corner of the cage where a quite remarkably ugly creature the size of a turkey had scrambled up onto a pile of wood to stand looking at them. From neck to long, draggled tail, it was covered with scales, between which poked straggly feathers, but its head was bare. At first, Lucinda thought it was some kind of vulture, but the beaked face wasn't quite right. Then she saw that the beak was actually a snout full of little needle-sharp teeth. It lifted up a huge bony claw and nipped at it for a moment, then put it down and tipped its head to stare at them again, yellow eyes unblinking. It's horrible, said Lucinda. I dare say it thinks the same about you, Gideon pointed out in a grumpy voice, but no animal is horrible, girl. Not one. They are all as they are made by nature. Why does it have feathers? Tyler asked. It doesn't look like a bird. No, it's not. As best I can tell, it's something closer to a late dinosaur, feathered like an Archaeopteryx. But one thing about it is rather horrible. Ragnar? Ragnar shook his head as though he didn't approve, but he walked to a part of the pen nearer the cockatrice and banged on the wire with the flat of his hand before pulling back quickly. As the creature turned its hairless head toward him, he stepped away. It kinked its neck and then jabbed its head as though trying to cough out something. Sorry, let me start that bit again. The page is stuck. It kinked its neck and then jabbed its head as though trying to cough out something stuck in its throat. A stream of clear liquid splashed on the wire where Ragnar's hand had struck. Poison, Gideon said cheerfully, and not a nice one. Isn't that fascinating? Won't do much more than irritate your skin, but if it got in your eyes, you'd be blind. Hence the goggles. And if you swallowed it, you would be very sick, if not dead, which is why we have the surgical masks. Now, come on and I'll show you the earlier stage of the life cycle, the fearful basilisk. The skinny old man strutted along past the end of the wire enclosure, bathrobe flapping like the robe of some tattered king. He seemed different today, happier, calmer, almost like a normal old man. Lucinda stepped wide around the spot where the poison had splashed on the fence. The group stopped in a little bay between pens. Metal trays, each with its own lights, as if it needed to be any hotter in here, had been set up side by side, perhaps a dozen in all. The bottoms of the trays were covered with straw, and each tray held from 1 to a half-dozen eggs. Lucinda could see they weren't chicken eggs. They were too round and slightly saggy, like ping-pong balls someone had baked in an oven. The cockatrices tend to eat their own eggs in captivity, we've found, Gideon said, and the young are vulnerable while they're small, so we keep them out of the main pen for the first few months. He indicated a row of glass tanks along against the back wall of the barn, beyond the egg trays. Come and see. The tanks were like miniature versions of the wire pen, with sand on the bottom and piles of rocks. The creatures inside didn't seem as interested in hiding as those in the bigger pen. A half dozen of them, each the size of a pet rat, crowded up against the glass, and when their long, hairless tails writhed, they had the look of nestling snakes, although their lumpy little bodies were covered with fine, pale down. The creatures also had claws on their bony front feet, but no back legs that Lucinda could see. She shuddered as the blunt little snouts banged against the glass. They don't use their poison to kill prey when they're this small, but mostly for self-defense, Gideon said. And they're so small, it's not a stream of it they shoot out, but a mist. You might not even know you'd inhaled it until paralysis started to set in. Hence, I'm guessing, the idea that a basilisk can turn a man to stone with a mere look. He nodded vigorously. Hungry. Do you want to see me feed them? Suddenly it was too much for Lucinda. She stumbled back, retreating as far from the scuttling creatures as possible, until she had the second floor railing at her back. She felt like she might faint or throw up. Hey, you okay? Tyler asked. He actually sounded like he meant it. Yes, I'm just... She took a deep breath. Come and see something else, said Colin kindly. The flying snakes are in the next pen. They're rather pretty. He was right. A tree stood in a generous wide tub, and the black and red and gold snakes hung from its branches. Every now and then one of them would snap open pale wings like a Japanese lady's fans and glide to the ground. The largest wasn't much longer than Lucinda's forearm, and their enclosure didn't stink like the cockatrice cages. That's a spice tree, said Uncle Gideon. He had finished feeding the basilisks and come to join them. Frankincense, to be specific, the resin that we are told the three wise men brought as a gift for the baby Jesus. He smiled a hard little smile. It's harder to keep the tree alive than the winged snakes. Whoa, said Tyler suddenly. Flying snakes? Are there flying monkeys here too? Only one on the entire farm, Uncle Gideon said. She's a real rarity. I saw her the night I saw the dragon. You did you? Gideon shook his head. I'm surprised. Zaza is usually shy of everyone, even us. That's why we let her have her freedom. Actually, sometimes we don't see her for weeks. Her name is Zaza? Tyler said it like he was memorizing something important, like a cheat code for a game he was playing, Lucinda thought. She just wanted to get out in the open air again, to somewhere that didn't smell like reptiles. Farther along the second floor there was another pen, this one just a flimsy chicken wire fence. The floor was covered with shallow pans of water. A number of slow, docile-looking creatures sat in the water or crawled stiff-legged across the floor. It was only when Lucinda looked at one, that stood unmoving, that she realized what made them so unusual. They have heads at both ends. Awesome! Tyler leaned over the rail, which made the light material buckle a little, and earned him a poke from Uncle Gideon. Don't break my cage, boy. We'll have Amphis Benet all over the place. Yes, they do seem to have two heads, don't they? And Amphisbaena's back is a decoy, it turns out. A tail with scales that look just like the creature's eyes, mouth, and nostrils on the other end. A myth put to rest, this one. Still, they don't exist anymore on Earth, except right here. Why is that, Uncle Gideon? Tyler asked. Well, said Uncle Gideon with another hard smile. That inconvenient curiosity of yours just won't let up for a minute now, will it? Lucinda could see the look in Tyler's eyes. What do you expect? he said. We're surrounded by magical animals, but you won't even stop. Right there, cried Uncle Gideon, causing strange sounds to rise from cages all around. Magical. What utter garbage! All of these animals, boy, all of them have at some time been alive in Earth's history. Apart from our work here, they are all now completely extinct as far as we know. These are real animals, as created by nature, and if I hear any more fairy tale nonsense from you, Gideon spluttered, why, I'll, Tyler said, well, it's DNA then, isn't it? Making monsters by, like, gene splicing? Uncle Gideon actually started to turn purple. You, boy, he said, have clearly been watching too much so-called reality TV or reading trash magazines, I don't know what. We will hear no more of that rubbish, if you please. He took a breath. His color eased. Now, he said, as if trying to be jolly again, enough arguing. We have many more things to see and a limited amount of time. Come along. Sadly, the hippocampus is in the sick barn. I think it may be dying. It was one of our finest specimens. Some animals are not meant to be kept captive, Ragnar said, a touch darkly, Lucinda thought. Yes, well. Gideon clapped his hands together as though he'd finished a difficult, messy job. I don't think we'll take the time to show you all the birds upstairs. The rock is only small, and to be honest, I doubt our phoenix is actually a phoenix. Now, come along. We may still have time to see Elliot. He likes to come out in the morning. The morning is almost over. His eyes and his wrinkled face were bright, too bright. Lucinda could not meet them. She dropped her own, looking at her feet and wondering what might be coming next, and what kind of creature Elliot could possibly be. Uncle Gideon took them to the pond in his small truck, an electric vehicle not much bigger than a golf cart. The others followed in Mr. Walkwell's wagon. Unlike Mr. Walkwell, Uncle Gideon clearly had no dislike of motorized transport, and did, in fact, seem to go in the opposite extreme. To the opposite extreme. He drove like he was auditioning for NASCAR, nor had he even bothered with a seatbelt. We'll get there much faster this way, he shouted at Lucinda and Tyler as they crashed down into a dip in the road, then actually lifted off the ground as they bounded up again. And Elliot doesn't show himself much after noon. Who's Elliot? Asked Lucinda as she clung to the frame of Gideon's little truck. Death by dragon, death by golf cart, one way or the other, they were clearly doomed. You'll see, if we're lucky. If anyone knew he was here, Elliot alone would bring in tourists by the hundreds of thousands. You're going to bring in tourists? Said Tyler. What? No, never! Uncle Gideon took his eyes off the bumpy road long enough to give Tyler a very stern glance. The truck promptly jounced so hard that Lucinda's head and ears began to ache. That's the most important rule of ordinary farm. Everything here is a secret. Secret, secret, secret. We know, said Tyler. Just remember, even a breath of what's here, getting out to the world at large, will ruin everything. Everything. He shouted the words, then fell silent, looking as sour as if he had caught Tyler and Lucinda making a video of the place to post on the internet. He said nothing for the next several minutes as they careened along the bumpy road, then emerged at last out of a little forest of oak and red-barked manzanita. Wow! That's not a pond! Lucinda stared out at the vast, flat expanse of water that filled the bottom of a medium-sized valley. That's a lake! The pond is what old Octavio used to call it. He had a rather dry sense of humor, said Gideon. Why do you think he called this place Ordinary Farm? What's in there? Tyler asked. A whale? Nothing so ordinary. Gideon giggled to himself. He seemed to be in a better mood again. Lucinda had thought he was going to shove them out of the truck when he had been yelling about secrecy. No, no, let's park and walk over to the rocks and sit quietly. Then maybe we'll see him. The sun feels good, said Uncle Gideon. I should get out more often, no matter what Mrs. Needle says. They had been sitting on a high place above the water for some minutes. Suddenly, Lucinda spotted something, long and silvery, moving just beneath the surface of the water. There, she said, I see something. Shh, cautioned Uncle Gideon. Not too loud. Elliot is one of the shyest of the animals we have. Elliot? That's a weird name for... Tyler abruptly fell silent, watching with his mouth open, as the creature broke the water about 100 feet away from where they sat, its silvery expanse of neck kicking up a curl of weight below. For a sea serpent? He finished. The shiny snake-like head swayed from side to side, then darted back down into the water. The curling neck remained visible above the surface for a moment, a shining loop. Then it too disappeared like a knot being undone. Lucinda's heart beat fast as she watched the graceful monster slide down and then back up to the surface again, but this time more from excitement than fear. I'm afraid the name Elliot is a bit of a joke, said Gideon. Ness, like Loch Ness. You see? Elliot Ness. I've heard of Loch Ness, said Lucinda quietly, staring. But I still don't understand the Elliot part. Never mind. He was a famous man, but long before your time. In any case, our Elliot goes after fish like the old Elliot used to catch bootleggers. Watch. They sat, watching the lake monster feed, all silvery swiftness, until the sun was high in the sky, and Gideon, weirdly calm now after a morning of watching his creatures, decided it was time they headed back for lunch.
And that is the end of that chapter. So coming up in our next reading, which will be early Sunday morning, is chapter 9. Let me see if I can get that thing to focus on it properly. Chapter 9, Tea with the Empress of Lilies, but for some reason it doesn't want to focus on it because I'm in the picture, I think. Anyway, it's not a picture that tells you much about the story anyway, So there we go. And here, very quickly, I go, as it is now approaching 8 o'clock my time here in sunny, surf-tastic California. I have no idea what that was about. Anyway, and I will be back next Sunday morning. And for those who come to that one, I will be reading earlier on, back to what is my new Sunday morning time, which is 1 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. 1 a.m. Not 2 a.m., 1 a.m. Okay, this last week I changed just for various reasons, but next week I'll be reading first at 1 a.m. my time on Sunday morning, and then I will be reading again in this slot, which is still going to be 7 p.m. my time, just like always. So I hope that is all as clear can be, because I cannot be any clearer than that, not in less than 1,600 pages. With that, I say thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for giving me an excuse, as I said, to babble and to talk to people other than my poor suffering family and my poor suffering dogs, who, even though they don't talk back to me, I know they have to listen to me for hours at a time every day, and they're kind of tired of it. So thank you for taking some of the burden off of my family, both two-legged and four-legged. I will implore, or at least suggest, for you to do the same. Take good care of yourself, but take good care of your loved ones also, friends and family, and anybody else who needs your assistance. These are odd, difficult times, and the more we pull together, the better we'll do, and the sooner things will be a little more cheerful and a little more reasonable again. And I'm a big believer in cheerful and reasonable
So, with that, I say farewell, peace, inshallah, and various other things. So, thank you so much. Good night. See you next Sunday.